Hi, so here we are again for one more video in our course, right? In this remote learning. So this course is topics in applied linguistics about assessment, this course, okay? And my name is Lilian Pascual. So this first week that we are in, I proposed to you two texts. Text 1, which is from Davis, 2018. The name of the text, the title is Terminology, Assessment, Evaluation, and Testing. And text 2 is from DENMAN and AL-MAHROOQI. I hope I'm saying it correctly. Probably not. General Principles of Assessment is the title of text number 2. So these two texts are going to be the discussions we have this week, okay? And I'm going to discuss in this video text 1, terminology, because I would like to clarify some points in the text which I find fascinating. So let's see where we can meet each other and discuss. You can make your notes, no problem, okay? You can pause the video, go back, and so on. You can watch the class over and over again, and so on. Okay, you decide. So we're going to start for now in the discussion about the beginning of the text 1. So the author, Davis, starts his text talking about the language programs and their existence. In a general way, assessment, evaluation, and tests, they are present and they are important issues in language programs. The author, Davis, starts and he explains each of the terms in the texts, right? In text 1. And he brings definitions in a clarifying manner. The three terms, assessment, evaluation, and tests, are treated in their different levels, contexts, possibilities of use. For instance, thinking and talking about assessment, evaluation, and tests for classroom contexts, the language program is as a whole, and language scale testing, proficiency, and so on. Before the author starts with the definitions, the author mentions some stakeholders involved in the assessment, evaluation, and testing processes. And these stakeholders, they are the people that who will have an aim to follow, a reason behind being part of a language program, be it as a worker, as a student, as a program manager, or a program receiver of some kind. Can be an assessment maker, can be an assessment taker. So these stakeholders, whoever they are the people who are involved somehow in decision making and result impacts. For instance, immediate stakeholders in a classroom are teachers and students, right? They have stakes to hold in the classroom. But you also have other types of stakeholders. You have supervisors, you have principals, you have parents, you have the government, you have a lot of different types of institutions and so on, right? So he talks about in the text stakeholders whose aims will be fulfilled by a language program existence. And assessment, evaluation, and testing is important for these stakeholders, okay? So, and then we have the definitions. In the text, some aspects that are connected to assessment, they are mentioned in the introduction of the paper. For example, we have the mention of summative and formative assessments. Formative and summative are different types of collecting data. One of them is related to a more quantitative spectrum. It is a quantified type of assessment. And the other one, which is formative, is based on a qualitative analysis and data collection. They have different purposes and they have positive and negative sides. as one would assume, right? Another term that is used in the introduction is psychometrics, related to tests more specifically. Psychometrics comes from the psychology part of the studies, academy, and so on, and metrics are connected to measurements. So it started as types of tests, assessments to measure something that was psychological, something that was cognitive. So, this psychometrics, it is a term that is related to the beginning of the psychological testing in people and how to measure things that we can see that relate to personality, intelligence, and so on. One of the most prominent ways of psychometrics, in my opinion, is the IQ test. So you do a test to test your intelligence coefficient. I think so. I'm having problems in the pronunciation. But with time, academic and professional areas ended up using the psychometric studies to measure and try to establish a quantitative relation to knowledge, progress, development, behavior, and so on. So psychometrics comes from there. These are some of the things that we can use tests for. Tests use metrics to try to describe the quantity in metrics of what someone knows about something. Okay? So I'm going to link for you here in this video another video that talks about psychometrics. What is psychometrics? Okay, I'm going to leave it down below in the description box and you can check it out. The author says, understanding that nowadays the theory, research, and practice demands an evaluation that is guided and takes into account the uses and the users of an evaluation, the author says about the past, when many evaluative practices were done and the data collected was useless, basically. As educators, there are some guidelines that we can follow to have an evaluation that is useful and that can generate data that we can use to improve our practices, our contexts, and our students' development, right? So, evaluation practices that were useless somehow in some contexts, they taught us that. And the author brings a few things that I bring here from his text, okay? So these guidelines are named on page 5257 and he enumerates them as A, B, and C, okay? So I'm going to put them here for you to check and follow along. So evaluation practices, they helped us to understand that evaluation is fundamentally pragmatic undertaking. Utility should be the ultimate criterion of effectiveness and quality. Any and all techniques should be made available to evaluators to ensure that evaluation leads to intended impacts. So these are the three things that the author brings, right? And And when the author talks about evaluation being a fundamentally pragmatic undertaking, is because it needs to be based in reality, right? It needs to be based in something that is based on reality. Utility should be the ultimate criterion of effectiveness and quality, because when we think of the uses, it gets us to a place that is safer and that is grounded. Any and all techniques should be available to evaluators to ensure that evaluation leads to intended impacts. So if we have different ways of evaluating something, we can cover different fronts. We can do different things to test different parts of what we are focusing, aiming, and so on. Okay? And there is also in the text a strategy. So the strategy that the author brings is this one. So considering then the use, the author mentions organization as the most important action. As a strategy, he offers this example here. During evaluation planning, stakeholders can be asked to engage in role-play scenarios during which they are presented with fictional evaluation results and quizzed on the likely usefulness of the information. I'm sorry, this should be in quotation marks, and here should be the name of the author, the year, and the page. I'm sorry. So this talks about a strategy that I would like to discuss very briefly. I interpret this as in an English classroom, for instance. The teachers, they are one or a few of the stakeholders that are involved in the assessment, evaluation, and testing practices. And so the teachers should consider the rates of the results and predicting which ways the information will be used, right? A student, for example, with a 100% result and a student with a 20% result. What do these percentages mean? What do they show? Do they represent specific aspects that need to be returned to? So this would be the usefulness of the results information, the data collected in order to inform decisions to be taken. So we should reflect on the results that are possible and what they mean. Here, engage in fictional scenarios where we have quizzed on the usefulness of the information. So why would it be useful? Why would it be important? Such grade, right? Still on the users and uses of tests, assessments, evaluations, the author starts on important issues for assessment and tests in relation to use and users. I bring to you 4 concepts from the text, which highlight some interesting aspects that we will see during this course too, okay? So the first one that I have here is initial decisions about the test, about test use will impact the types of evidence that will be necessary to support specific validity arguments. I'll comment on each one, okay? Then I bring also, since assessment investigates many different aspects of students' learning, psychometric issues may not be a validity concern. For example, if an assessment is designed to motivate learners, construct validity will be less relevant than the ability of assessment to make students engage in classroom learning. And the last one that I bring is validity in the test itself or validity in the test use. So talking about initial decisions has to do with the answer to the question. What is the evidence that supports particular interpretations of the scores in this test? This has to do with validity, okay? And then we have formative assessment versus summative assessments being related to this discussion. Since assessment investigates many different aspects of student learning, psychometric issues may not be a valid concern. So psychometrics has to do to summative, numbers, quantity, and they may not be a concern here because the assessment investigates different aspects. It may not be something that should be quantified, or that could be even. And this last part, for example, if an assessment is designed to motivate learners, construct validity will be less relevant than the ability of assessment to make students engage in classroom learning. Construct as the theory behind the tests, the assessment, the evaluation. So construct validity is to say that this test is valid, this assessment is valid because of theories in language teaching, and so on, okay? And we have to consider nowadays the validity in the test, not in the test itself, but in the test use. A test should be valid because of the use of that test or that assessment and evaluation for that matter. But so continuing here, I also bring that proceeding to a more pedagogical application ending of the text, the author points out some issues to be considered in order to have a better understanding of the language program teachers that are working with, of the language programs that the teachers are working with. There are 4 of these considerations which I bring here too. The first one is for specifications. So teachers may want to ascertain the educational effectiveness of material using assessment, evaluation, or testing. To B, demonstrate student learning to outside audiences, for example, parents, for example, governors, government, institutions, and so on. Teachers may want to use the assessment, evaluation, and testing to identify the needs, the students' needs, or D, to motivate students and engage them in their own learning. Each of these uses may require different types of evidence and information. So we need to think about each of these specifications, for instance, to decide regarding the uses, right? The second one has to do with ethics. Since evaluation and assessment enable decision making, they advance the agendas of particular groups. That is, some groups and not others are empowered, depending on whose goals are privileged in the assessment and evaluation enterprise. Moreover, different users will have different project aims and will seek to use evaluation and assessment findings in different ways. If important stakeholders groups are overlooked when conceiving a program inquiry, assessment and evaluation will be useful for some stakeholders and not others. If important stakeholders. But that's okay. Here, I would like to talk to you that this brings to mind, at least for me, the large-scale tests, which are high-stakes tests, right? We can talk about here regarding disability, right? We can talk about different types of inequalities that can happen. I'm going to bring a different situation. So these tests, large-scale tests, which I was reminded of when I was reading this text, they have different users, right? So they have different users. And for instance, and the users have different aims. For instance, I may take a proficiency test in order to start a master's degree, or to apply for a scholarship, or to find a better job, right? Some of the options. I have many more options to do that, but so if the group that decides on important aspects in the test that I'm going to take, if this group doesn't consider the different aspects of the possibilities allowed by their tests, it turns out to be a test that is not fair, may not be fair. If the test is fully concentrated in academic context, it may be proving my proficiency in academic context, but not in contexts that relate to my job. So I did this test, I proved my proficiency in academic contexts. This test doesn't prove the other one, right? So this is one way of focusing on one type of use only and not considering the other ones, the other types of uses according to different stakeholders, okay? And the third is assessing language programs. So an evaluation question is similar to a question in applied linguistics research, which I will come back here later. Okay, just wait a second. And the author also says that assessing language programs, ideally, questions should be A, something that intended users are interested in answering. Intended users can be students, can be teachers. B, answerable in a reasonable amount of time and at a reasonable cost. And C, empirically, A, B, C, okay, empirically oriented such that data may be used to provide an answer. So these aspects highlighted here, they have to do with practicality. So a test, a question, an assessment, an evaluation should be practical. It should be in an amount of time that I can do, that I can establish, right? It needs to have a limit in costs, especially in schools, public schools, we have limited costs. And it has to do with reliability. I didn't put it here, but also validity. So it needs to provide an answer. Otherwise, it will be useless, right? It needs to provide an answer. It needs to be used to provide an answer. Okay? Now, continuing to the fourth point that he makes here. The evaluation question that we had that should be asked. If a group of educators intend to use testing or assessment in a particular way, their assessment efforts must proceed on the basis of clear articulation of the students' language abilities relevant to the goals and aims of the educational program. It can be something that is not relevant in that context. So, this is an important remark due to the very nature of teaching, assessing, and learning. They are all connected. In Brazil, for instance, we can have specific questions that will be demanded by institutions that we work in, schools, and so on. We have the local, more immediate context. We have, for instance, schools, immediate, local. We have a more national context. For instance, in Brazil, we have the educational ministry. I don't know if you have, do we? Let's get ENEM. ENEM is a test that is a national context, and it has a lot of students involved and so on. So national context exemplified with ENEM, okay? And we have a more international and global context to consider when we are asking questions to assess, evaluate, and test something. For example, the PISA. Do you know the PISA? If you don't, search about it. It is an assessment. It's very important. Okay, so we will go here. We will use BNCC files. So we will get to one of these contexts to think about the assessment, testing, and evaluation. So I want you to think about BNCC contexts. Okay, so we have in BNCC a lot of different guidelines, and BNCC is the most recent document and guideline that we have released by the government, right? It is quite new. So considering these two images, I'm going to put these images in the forum that is available for you for text 1, okay? So considering these images that talk about eixo oralidade and interação discursiva in that axis, I want you to think, what evaluation questions or question could we ask as teachers? Let me reframe it. What evaluation question or questions could we ask as teachers considering this type of knowledge, ability, skill, object, aim, interaction? Okay? Because here we have construção de laços afetivos e convívio social. Here we have funções de uso da língua inglesa em sala de aula, classroom language. We have these abilities here, interagir em situações de intercâmbio, demonstrando iniciativa para utilizar a língua inglesa, coletar informações do grupo perguntando e respondendo sobre a família, os amigos, a escola e a comunidade, solicitar esclarecimentos em língua inglesa sobre o que não entendeu e o significado de palavras ou expressões desconhecidas, So consider that this is what you worked on your 6th grade class. What evaluation question or questions could we make as teachers? Could we ask as teachers? And I know, I am aware that we are not considering the other context in which an English classroom test, assessment, evaluation is inserted in, but thinking about the uses and using this guideline, how could we start thinking about these issues? And I wanted to post your question or questions in the forum that will be available for this text discussion, text 1, okay? And let's see what we can come up with as a group. I am looking forward to check it up. I wanted to think about it and try to come up with a question or some questions, okay? Okay, if you have any questions, you can use the forum for questions and doubts. And have a great day. See you next. Bye-bye.